Trump voter and business owner whose workers were detained by ICE speaks out.
Financially as well as emotionally. It takes a toll. You know, you get to know these guys. You become their friends. Just not an employer, but a friend. And you see what happens to their family. It's quite a shock. They did everything right. And they all had their work permits. They all, a couple and few of them have driver's licenses. They worked with me on the Navy base, which had to go through intense security, and they found out all about their past. And
no, this is good for you guys to hear, because a lot of people don't understand. Like, there are a fuck ton of migrant workers, okay? There are a fuck ton of migrant workers in this country that have the proper authorization, that have gone through rigorous background checks. Their immigration status is in limbo, like the lady that we just saw. For something so marginal, so inconsequential, she cashed a $200 fake check, okay? And then had her green card taken away in the process. That's a cruel-ass system, man. That is a ruthless and cruel-ass system. And it's the lack of care that we have as a society for some of these most marginalized people, some of the most vulnerable people that are simply just making ends meet. You know, they're here, they're working, they are going to ICE facilities with regular frequency to check in routinely. They have their court dates, they have their paperwork. They're trying to put pennies together so that they can get a lawyer to help them out throughout this process. And they're making pennies on the dollar on top of this. And then they're being called fucking criminals and getting deported, ripped away from their families, ripped away from their neighborhoods, ripped away from their lives that they've developed here, that they've built here. Like dudes who have been working here in this country for multiple decades. You know what I mean? White people don't give a shit. You're talking to a wall. I don't think that's true. I think that there are plenty of white people who do give a shit. But there are certain kinds of white people that don't, the racist kind. And Trump, and that number is much smaller than you think. That's my point. I mean, here's a white person who does give a shit now, because this is the leopards ate my face moment for him.
You become connected with them and more than just a boss employee.
You voted for Donald Trump?
Yes, I did.
If you had a chance to sit across the president like you do now with me, what would you say to him?
Well, you know, the buck stops there, right? I did not understand his wishes to go after people who are legally here and trying to do right by them and their families.
What's up?
And I didn't understand that that's what he was trying to do. From what I understood, from what he has said, and from what ICE officials have said, that is not at all what they're doing. And then all the representatives of them are stating the same thing. That's not what we're doing. We're going after the criminals. Well, what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, look, at a certain point, you also have to realize, like, when there is not a single this guy's not watching my broadcast, man. You know, he's not a HasanAbi head. You all feel the way that you do when you're like, these guys are so dumb. But you have to remember, like, think about your parents. Some of your parents probably also have the same exact mentality, okay? And part of the reason why they have that same exact mentality is because they're watching Fox, or even when they're watching MSNBC or CNN, up until Trump became president and started doing these deportations, there was very little coverage on how fucking violent this shit was going to look like. And that's the reason why I place a lot of this blame on the Democratic Party as well, because they did not say a single damn thing. They did not counter message against this. They counter messaged. Not only did they not counter message against this, they messaged for this. They messaged in the direction, maybe not to the same severity, maybe not to the same level of ruthless cruelty, but they certainly wanted a militarized border. They wanted to fundraise for a piece of legislation that was going to do Trump's 2020 border policies. They did this on the fucking campaign trail. They said, build the wall. They kept propping up. Nice to meet you, man. They kept propping up Biden's like deportations as a fucking benefit, not talking about how devastating this shit actually was. The employer said they had their work permits. These are people here on an NTA before an IJ who entered illegally and were released pending immigration court. Yeah. On an NTA before an IJ, like immigration judge, you're saying, right? Like they got the proper authorization. There are a lot of people like this. There are a lot of people exactly like this. There are millions of people like this who come into the country, illegally. Yeah, notice to appear. NTA is notice to appear before an immigration judge who entered illegally and were released pending immigration court. Yeah. Now, what's crazy about the immigration court is that it works as a function. It works alongside the federal the federal agencies. So it's not like a separate entity. So when there's a woke president, they can be a little less restrictive. And then when there's a president like Donald Trump, he can use the immigration courts system as a mechanism to literally steal people, to kidnap people. That's why you see so many of those like gruesome images of people that are just like going to their regular court date. Okay, they're getting their notice to appear. They're appearing in court in front of an immigration judge thinking like, oh, I'm just going to get an extension, right? I'm going to get an extension. I'm going to get my work clearance. I've been here for like 10 years, whatever. This is what I've done every single time. And now that opportunity is being used to kidnap this person. Trump ain't so great when he starts to hurt your life, huh? I mean, like this guy is the classic example of like a fucking dickhead business owner who also fell to the mercy of the overwhelming amount of like, there's so many fucking criminal migrants out there. Immigration court system within the DOJ, so a part of the executive branch. Yes. You can get a work permit after accruing a certain amount of days of filing an asylum application, for example. Yeah. There are so many people like this who we could just like expeditiously process and give the proper permanent clearances for, right? But we don't do that. We just keep their immigration status in limbo. And that is by design. Same with the fucking DACA. Same with the DACA recipients. Deferred action on childhood arrival. 90% approval for amnesty for this program. The program itself is crazy. It is crazy rigid. You can't even fucking fly out of the country and shit. You know what I mean? If you're on DACA, it's ridiculous. You have to have an unvarnished record, no crimes whatsoever. You have to go to college. You have to have a job, like all this shit. It is so rigid. And the fact that we don't give these people proper amnesty is insane. Dreamers is who I'm talking about. Yes. DACA, deferred action on childhood arrival. Remember, these are people who came into the country alongside their parents when they were a child. Okay. When they were a fucking minor. They had no say in this process. And this country is all they know. They don't know any other country. They grew up here. This is their country. It's functionally no different than birthright citizenship. Can you report both sides and show ICE removing criminals as well? I can't. You want to know why I can't? Because the fucking criminals that ICE is removing are already in jail because they're criminals. They've already been processed through the criminal justice system. That's why I can't show you both sides of this equation, because the people that they are removing right now, the people that they're deporting right now, the ones that have a criminal record are for incredibly minor shit. They're not like rapist decapitators or some shit that ICE is like bravely taking out of this country. Birth certificate says otherwise, says My Lottery. My Lottery is a great name for you. Yeah, you did hit the lottery, I guess. That makes you feel like you're better than these people. Chew My Bullets one says, can you report both sides and show ICE removing criminals as well? ICE is not removing criminals. That's why so many people turn around and say, well, they're criminals because they entered the country illegally. You know? That's why. That's why people have to do the classic goalpost shift. Trump didn't say he was going to remove everyone that fucking crossed the border, okay? He said he was going to go after these like rapist, drug dealer, vicious, violent types. They're deporting people that have been here for 20 years who have been checking in with ICE on a monthly basis, since the agency even made these sorts of checks a requirement. They have the proper clearance and the authorization to work, okay? And they're removing people that have like a trespass from like 15 years ago. You think that's a fucking rabid criminal that you have to get out of this country ASAP? Yeah, 65% of the detainments have no criminal record, and 93% had no violent convictions. Oh, and the 7% that I'm willing to bet, if we looked into it, the 7% that they have violent convictions are either like got in a fucking bar fight, or the ones that actually have the heinous crimes on their record were already in prison and they're being removed from prison and being deported instead of going through the entire fucking sentence. Understand that. Because in an effort to justify why they're doing this, like for example, one of the things that they did was park ICE into Rikers Island in New York City. Why did they do that? Because they want to get people who have actually done any crimes whatsoever that are migrants to be deported, so they can fucking beef up the numbers of criminals that they're apprehending and deporting, okay? But even with all of that, because they have this ridiculous quota for, remember, a problem that doesn't exist, even with all of that, they have 7% violent convictions in the deportations. 7%. 7 fucking percent. And even before these numbers came out, this is what my suspicion was. I told you that the majority of these people are not going to have any convictions whatsoever, and that the ones that do have some kind of conviction will be for like mail fraud or wire fraud or like trespassing or something minor, and that a very tiny number, a very, very tiny number will be people that actually have like kind of like a violent felony on their record. And those people are already in those people are already inside of these detention facilities to begin with.